Greetings. My name is Rula Hawa. I'm an assistant professor in family studies and human development at Brescia University College in London, Ontario, Canada. I'm honored to be presenting on behalf of the International Federation for Home Economics, IFHE, to celebrate World Home Economics Day 2021 and World Health Organization Decade of Healthy Aging 2020 to 2030. The title of my presentation is Healthy Aging and Age-Friendly Communities, Integrating Well-Being in Teaching and Learning. In this presentation, I'll be answering the question, how do we integrate the theme of World Home Economics Day into teaching? And in the brief time that I have for this webinar, I'll try to tap into some of my experiences as a family studies educator to examine approaches to integrate healthy aging and well-being in the classroom. And at the end, I'll be sharing some of my resources. So I really hope that you find this webinar useful. I'll start us off with an acknowledgement of the land and why are land acknowledgements necessary? Inspired by the 94 recommended calls to action contained in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, now known as the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, land acknowledgements are a necessary first step towards honoring the original occupants of a place. They also help Canadians recognize and respect Indigenous peoples' inherent kinship beliefs when it comes to the land, especially since those beliefs were restricted for so long. So we acknowledge that the campus of Brescia University College at Western University is located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lunapewek, and Adawandurans peoples. As we share knowledge, teaching, learning, and research within this university, we recognize that this territory has always been a place of teaching, learning, and research. So for the agenda for today's webinar, I'm going to start with the determinants of health, which I'm sure everyone is aware of. The importance of the determinants of health, particularly in an area such as well-being, really is going to be a nice backbone to the whole presentation today. I'll walk you through a couple of courses that I'm currently teaching at Brescia. I'll just go very briefly over some of the activities that I do in my two courses. And then I'll share a few courses that are taught at the high school level. So this is when I was a high school teacher. So I'll go over very briefly some of the big ideas and how can we integrate particularly well-being into those courses. And at the end, I'm sharing some of my resources. So what does the term age-friendly communities mean to the students, faculty, and staff at Canada's only women's university? What else other than Brescia University College?
When I think of the term age-friendly communities, I think of a place that welcomes and celebrates people of all different ages for the diverse and important contributions that each of them have to make to our society at large.
An age-friendly community is one where people of any age can participate in activities that keep the community healthy. This includes a space where older individuals can easily connect with each other and remain independent.
An age-friendly community is ensuring the accessibility of a safe place to live, including both nursing and retirement homes. It's also ensuring equal access to quality health care for all.
An age-friendly community are environments designed to help celebrate people of all ages, respecting their decisions and lifestyle choices.
An age-friendly community allows people of all ages to live in security, to enjoy good health, and to fully participate in society.
Communities can be age-friendly by considering the interests of their aging members and by ensuring that members from every age group have opportunities to participate and have their voices valued.
Communities can contribute to the inclusion, health, and independence of an aging community simply by listening to their needs and making changes to create a more inclusive world.
And thank you to So how do we teach about the elderly and well-being in the Family Studies and Human Development Department at PHEA? So the first thing that I would like to share with you is a model that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and it's really not a new model. It's a model, very basic model of determinants of health. This figure shows one influential model of the determinants of health that illustrates how various health influencing factors are embedded within broader aspects of society. Older people and well-being, again, we have to think about individual lifestyle factors, but not only that, social and community networks are very important, and so are general socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental conditions that they live in. So what are the determinants of health? And of course, some of the old thinking is health is a result of personal choices that people make. And of course, we're all familiar with the more current thinking, which really says that health is a result of everything that we do, where we live, learn, work, and play. And these conditions are called determinants of health. And what you see in front of you are basically a model, one of those many models developed by Canadian Public Health Agency of Canada, or PHEA. And as you can see, some of the variables, income and income distribution, education, unemployment and job security, employment and working conditions, food insecurity, housing, social exclusion, social safety network, health services, Aboriginal status, being an Aboriginal person, gender, race, disability, and all of those influence a person's health. And if we look again closely here, we see older adults are being part of the model, and older adults are also, we have people with low income, and older adults tend to have more limited income, and also people with disabilities. And as we all know, as people age, there are more limitations in terms of their physical health, and there's deterioration in terms of their mobility, and also in mental health and all of the other areas. So clearly, as older adults, we can see that there are a lot of those factors that influence the well-being. And when we look more closely at some of those factors, we notice income disparity is a huge factor, again, that impacts the well-being of older adults. So is housing, so is food security and transportation. And again, if we look at those rather macro level factors, how do these influence teaching and learning? So the first course that I'm going to share with you is called Diversity and the Canadian Family. This is a course that I teach at PHEA. I taught the first section of the course in the fall, and now I'm currently teaching the second section of the course, and that's the winter section. So looking at this course, these are the learning outcomes. This course examines contemporary diversity as it impacts individuals and families. Its psychosocial approach enables students to think through their own perspectives on age, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual identity, and more in preparation for working with people from diverse backgrounds. And we call those sometimes forms of oppression. And when we look at some of those forms of oppression, things like exploitation, marginalization, cultural imperialism, violence, poverty, homelessness, global inequality, all of these are issues affecting the elderly globally. So the question is, how do we promote well-being in a diversity course? And this course, as you can see, is not focused only on the elderly. So clearly there's a lot of diverse populations here, but one of the topics that definitely we look at is age, definitely ability, gender, and family. And all of those are very important variables when we're looking at well-being and the elderly. One of the activities that I did in semester one in this course to engage my students, and again, the whole idea is I'm trying to engage the students in their learning, particularly around in this case here, all of the kind of deliverables or all of the learning outcomes of this course. So as students, in this particular task that I'm sharing with you, and that's the culminating task. So I would share this, actually, I did this particular culminating task at the end of the course. So the task that the students were basically asked to do is to come up with strategies that can promote participation of people who are disadvantaged on the basis of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic and other status in various aspects of the Canadian society. So I asked the students to work in groups, and in their groups, they were asked to create opportunities for access to resources that would amplify voice and promote social justice. And again, as the students, their takeaway from this course as they're finishing and walking out of this course, I wanted them to think in terms of what are the implications for practice as you're working with diverse families now, but not only now, also in the future. So this particular task or assignment, the students did an amazing job. Some of them had videos as a group. The whole process of discussing all those ideas, there's a lot of critical thinking, there's problem solving, and they're learning. They're learning about all of those different lenses in terms of oppression, but in particular, they're learning about, from a strengths-based perspective, they're learning how to promote well-being for all those different groups, and in this case, the elderly. So as I'm assessing and reflecting on the course in semester one, again, the approach that I'm using is I'm trying to focus on the individual level, but also I'm trying to focus on the community as well. And doing those group work assignments, they're very much in silo because the students are working together in the classroom. Mind you, this year is a very special year. They were all working together in Zoom in a very virtual setting. There's not really a lot of community involvement. So something I wanted to introduce, particularly if I'm thinking around the area of well-being, and if I'm thinking well-being towards some of those more vulnerable populations, community partnerships are extremely important. So what I've done here is I introduced an experiential learning component to the course in semester two. So between 2011 and 2016, these are some of the stats. London's population increased by 4.8% from 366,151 individuals to 383 and 822 individuals. So, and much of the increase in those stats was a result of people moving from other communities within Ontario. And as such, that created really low vacancies and higher housing costs for Londoners. And a closer look at who is this segment that's really kind of fast growth of this segment of population. A closer examination was really showed that that segment of people was age 65 and older, and they increased by 19% in the City of London. And as this population continues to grow, there will be a demand for housing and support needs for an aging population. So those housing needs are definitely extremely important for vulnerable populations. So what I've done here in this semester is I wanted the students to get a taste of the community. I wanted to bring the community into the classroom. So I did something, I initiated a partnership with an organization called City Studio London. City Studio has, I believe, started in Vancouver, in Canada, and they also have, they operate as well in Montreal, and they've started as well in London. So through the City Studio London partnership, students have meaningful opportunities to apply the skills that they're learning in the course in semester two to a real life challenge. I wanted the students to kind of take the learnings from the course, but apply it in a real life situation. And as such, I wanted them to help to contribute to inclusive strategies to eliminate barriers for full participation of diverse communities including, of course, the elderly. The topic that I picked, because of the housing, the urgent need for housing in London, because that's a real need based on the stats, is addressing housing and homelessness crisis, urgent housing for vulnerable Londoners. And that topic is very much an organically driven topic, meaning it's coming from a real need from the strategic planning for the city. And I wanted the students to kind of have their hands into this particular project. So what I've done in this assignment is I did community-based participatory research. So I reached out, as I mentioned, to the city, and the people who helped me to reach out to the city was basically City Studio staff. And the City Studio staff, through that partnership, facilitated meetings with city staff. And we all decided that based on the area of need, that's going to be a very important area for the students to focus on. We're going to do some research. I'm going to get the students involved in community-based participatory research. So the first thing that I facilitated with the students, I put them in groups. It's a large class. I have around 46 students. And in their groups, students' first task is to conduct a secondary data analysis. So they did something called an environmental scan. And what they did is they scanned websites for organizations that provide services for vulnerable populations. And we decided on, in terms of the vulnerable population, we decided on women and girls that are facing domestic violence in the city of London or fleeing from domestic violence. Even though this is not really focused on the elderly, I'm sharing this particular strategy or course, like the project that I did in the course, because it really applies to any particular vulnerable population. So if this is really something you are interested in doing and reaching out to the community, I strongly believe in the importance of community-based participatory research. So after the environmental scans, students came up with a summary of the issues and the gap analysis. Their next step is to do primary data collection. And with the primary data collection, students are engaged in in-depth interviews. So each group of students was matched with a volunteer from the city. So those volunteers are really prominent leaders in the violence against women sector. And those leaders will be working with the students to help them in the process. So the students will be, each group will be interviewing the assigned volunteer. This project, I had to get ethics approval for it because it involves participants. All the students who participated in the interviewing have all done ethics training by completing ethics modules. The students are in the process of conducting their interviews, actually next week. And in their interviews, they're going to do something called a SWOT analysis. And a SWOT analysis is, as the acronym stands for, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats facing programs in the City of London in our situation. And again, the whole idea behind it is based on the secondary data, scanning of all those websites. So they did some scanning, they did some charting, they came up with the gap analysis. They used that information to develop an instrument or an interview guide, and that instrument would be used, a common instrument by all the groups to conduct those in-depth interviews with a SWOT analysis. The final step of this project is report writing and recommendations. So the really neat part about running this course in semester 2 is I've added the community. I brought the community into the course. And the report writing and the recommendations that the students will be doing, they're actually going to do those final reports. They're going to go to a committee, the Violence Against Women Committee in the City of London. And all those recommendations are going to senior leadership in the city, and that will directly impact policy and services in the City of London. I believe in whenever we're thinking whenever we're thinking well-being and how do we integrate well-being, again, thinking of the model, the individual model, but we want to be bringing in the community, we also need the bigger system, political action. Political action in terms of teaching and learning is so important. How do we integrate that element into our courses and into our classes? So to continue with, again, the City Studio project, this is where it shows that not only we brought the community in, these are the key stakeholders. So these are prominent leaders in the city. The way I designed the class is such that students will have, again, we're all in the midst of the pandemic, or kind of hopefully moving out of the pandemic. Everything is done through Zoom. So we have 8 of those leaders along with city staff, particularly in the area of housing in London, city studio staff, all joined with the 46 students in the class. We've had already 2 synchronous classes, and this is a great way for political action because those prominent leaders from the Violence Against Women Network are really eager to work with the students and mentor the students, but also to take that research that the students are doing back to the senior leadership to make a change. So political action is so important, bringing in those key stakeholders, again, in the classroom, or even having the students go to the community. In our case, we had to do the opposite just because of the circumstances we're in now. And what you will see here is City Studio sharing some of that work in terms of their own social media. And again, it does have its importance. It does have its impact in terms of political action. This is a great way of integrating a well-being lens into the courses that we teach. And another strategy that I use to integrate well-being, and well-being being this big umbrella that goes beyond the individual level to include things like improving housing, and in our case, is improving housing in the City of London. So social media has a very important role, and in this particular course, I included social media as a very important element. In Russia, we did something called a podcast, and the podcast that we did, it's actually led by our vice principal and academic dean, Dr. Loretta Frederiking. And what she's done is she led a podcast. It's a 4-part series with the main focus is on resilience. So when we're thinking well-being, we're often thinking resilience. We want our elderly to be not just where they were at, but also hopefully to move forward, hopefully to sustain the well-being and the level of health that they have. And what you see here, we've got a podcast where we shared some of our experiences around the City Studio. So that was shared in a form of podcast. We also used Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Russia's website, and all of those ways are ways of political action, but also engaging the students in different levels of advocacy and activism, so that they are able to promote well-being to vulnerable populations. And again, these could be applied to any particular vulnerable population in any city, really globally, even with very limited resources. You need to bring in the community, and you need to bring in that lens of activism. And the students are not short of being activists. We just need to kind of provide that context for them in the classroom to be able to do that. So here's another course that I teach at Brescia. It's human sexuality across the lifespan. Again, the focus of the course is clearly sexuality across the span, and being an older person is clearly one of those groups that are very important in this course. And if we look at the learning outcomes for the human sexuality, the main focus is sexuality throughout the span, with an emphasis on the diversity of human sexuality along many dimensions. Again, we look at things like age, gender identity, sexual orientation and identity, ethnicity within Canada, and also students had an opportunity to look at cultures around the world. And in this course, students learned about sexuality and the life cycle, birth, infancy, childhood and adolescence, and even sexuality in the adulthood years. And those adulthood years can be young adulthood or in later life. And students looked at things like sex, love, and intimacy in later life, and how all of these can be part of aging and well-being. And we're very kind of unique as a human species, really. So main learning outcome is physical, psychological, and behavioral effects of aging on sexuality. I picked for you particularly the learning outcome that relates to the elderly or people in their older years, and how these compare with attitudes towards sexuality and aging. So students had to kind of work with those concepts. And one of the assignments, and again, I wanted them to see, adults in later life. I wanted them to see them beyond being older. So we need relationships as babies to survive, but also as adults, we seek those relationships. And maybe perhaps we can think of those relationships as emotional survival. So when we teach these concepts in our classes, it's important for young people to see that love and sex also can be for older people, and to create that particular well-being element or awareness around older adults can be also sexual. I had something called critical discussions in the class, and I'm sharing with you one particular critical discussion. So in addition to the content, students had 4 critical discussions. Each critical discussion is worth 10%. So it's substantial. I wanted the students to work in groups, because often when you work in a group, you have an opportunity to discuss, communicate, you bounce off ideas, there's critical thinking, there's problem solving, and often the product is very rich. And I did not want the students to be just working on their own. So in this particular assignment that I'm sharing with you, or a task, basically a critical discussion that I'm sharing with you, I wanted to encourage the students to engage in the course material, and again, among their classmates. And those critical discussions very much reflect BRESHA's 7 competencies. In BRESHA, we follow competency-based learning, and these competencies are really building blocks of the BRESHA experience. So by providing my students those opportunities in the classroom through those critical discussions, I'm really hoping to promote BRESHA's competencies that will be very useful for the students as they move on beyond the university into real life and into work. And these are communication, critical thinking, inquiry and analysis, problem solving, self-awareness and development, social awareness and engagement, and valuing. And I wanted the students to gain those particular skills through the course, so this way they're able to think critically and participate actively in society. And these are attributes that the students will need to apply through their entire life. As you can see here from this particular task or critical discussion, in their groups, students are answering the 5 W's and an H: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And as you can see, because this is a course focused on human sexuality across the lifespan, each group is tackling a particular lifespan. And if you look at the task for group 7, for instance, their task was to look at particularly the later years. I put them over 55. I mean, it depends on what would be a global definition for later years, for as we are aging and people are actually living longer. So those could be even over 65 as we're kind of moving, midlife is not even anymore 50. So I wanted the students to think of who's involved. So when you're thinking of sexuality, let's say in the later years, who does that involve? And what's the issue at hand? I wanted them to come up with an issue that affects this particular span. And again, when do you need to attend to this issue? When does it become important? Is there a particular space or location where this issue becomes even more important? And why is this issue important? So in the case of later years, why is it important to look at sexuality in later adult years? And why does society need to address it? And as a group, how do you plan to address it? What are some of your strategies and suggestions? So again, the products that were delivered in this particular critical discussion were just outstanding. Students came up with videos, different strategies to kind of share what does well-being towards the elderly mean, and how can we think of the elderly as sexual adults. Another important piece that I try to do in my classes is, again, that I find very important, particularly with the elderly, is passing on the wisdom. And I know we're operating between the individual lens based on our determinants of health model. So on the individual level, we're sometimes operating in my classrooms. I try to give them the group experience. I try to bring in the community to the class with the whole notion of intentionality of widening their circle beyond their groups into the community. And then as we looked at particularly as creating politics and policies and having impact, so that political activism. Another important piece that I feel at the individual level is very important in terms of integrating well-being in the classroom is passing on the wisdom of the elderly. And again, how do you do that? There's so many ways of doing that. We all know that storytelling is so important in the lives of the elderly. We also know now that technology helps us in capturing some of that wisdom. I mean, you can bring a guest speaker, the elderly, into your class. You can do a podcast with the elderly as they pass on some of their wisdom, some of their stories. You can video record and bring that to your classroom. So now with the technology, I feel we have opportunities to get some of that passing on the wisdom of the elderly more so into our classrooms. So here's just a little activity and exercise that I usually like to do with my students in my classes. It's meditation. It's meditation with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Soor, who's a certified coach and wellness advocate. She's going to walk us through a meditation activity. So what I want you to do now is relax. You can use this activity in your classroom to pass on the wisdom from the elderly. And for particularly Dr. Soor, her professional journey spanning from clinical care of the elders to speaking with her grandparents about sexual health or about any other areas, and holistic health later on is very empowering. It's empowering for them as they take control of their well-being, and passing on some of those wisdoms like meditation, bringing that to your own classrooms. Particularly if you have a 3-hour class, it's a really good technique. The beginning of the class, maybe in the middle of the class where students are feeling tired, and without further ado, less talking from my part, let's see Dr. Soor.
Hello, I'm Dr. Soor. From clinical care to health coaching, I've become very passionate about well-being, and watching my parents age has been quite a realization. Empowering them and guiding them has been such a challenging but important balance in my life. And in this changing world, they still find comfort in things that are familiar to them, like my dad's relaxation technique. Let's try it out together. Sit comfortably where you are. And when you're ready, gently close your eyes. Focus on your shoulders. Let them relax. Let them drop slowly, slightly to the ground. Feel your body melts towards the ground. And when you're ready, we're going to take a deep breath in through our nose. And out through our mouth with a sigh, letting it all go. One more time. One last time. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. I always feel refreshed after this. Who knew my dad's words had such wisdom?
Thank you, Dr. Suhr. I hope you've all enjoyed this meditation and relaxation. So moving from the post-secondary level, moving from my courses at Brescia, I'm just going to quickly look at how do we promote healthy aging and well-being at the secondary school level. So I've picked some courses for you, again, very briefly. Again, given the limited time that we have for the webinar, I'm just going to do very broad strokes on that. So what I've picked for you is courses, family studies courses from the revised Ontario Social Sciences and Humanities curriculum that was released in 2013. And I had the privilege and honor to be a lead writer on the senior courses in family studies at the ministry at the time. And the courses that I picked for you are, all of them are grade 12 classes. The family studies curriculum per se in Ontario lies under a curriculum document called the Ontario Social Sciences and Humanities Curriculum, and in it, family studies is one of those interdisciplinary subjects listed there. And the courses that I picked for you are HFA for you, for C, this is Nutrition and Health. It's a grade 12 university and college preparation course. I also picked for you Families in Canada, which is a grade 12 university and also comes as a college preparation course. Challenge and Change in Society, which is HSB for you. This is a university preparation course, and Human Development Throughout the Lifespan. This is an M-level course, and in Canada, when we talk about M-level, it means it prepares students for either a path to university or a path to college. And you've got a reference there, a source, and I have a lot of the things that I've discussed in my webinar are at the end with a couple of slides that I'm hoping that these will be useful resources for you. So the first course is called Nutrition and Health. And again, Nutrition and Health has a lot of units. And what I've done here is I've picked for you in particular, a particular course expectation as it applies to the elderly. So this particular expectation is called Eating Patterns and Trends, Nutrition Throughout the Lifespan. And as you can see, there is an emphasis on nutrition throughout the span. And one of the topics that the students tackle is particularly nutrition for the elderly. So demonstrate an understanding of food and nutrition related issues at different stages in the lifespan. So if you're interested in any of those ideas, at the very end, I have in my 2 slides or 2 or 3 slides, I've listed the source here so you can connect with and check the ministry document, but also some websites and sources where you can actually, if you like some of those activities and you want to incorporate them into your perhaps high school level courses, feel free to check the sources and the resources that I have for you at the end. Another course that I thought would be relevant and definitely has a course expectation that tackles or addresses needs of the elderly is the HHS4U or HHS4C, and that course is called Canadian Families. And one particular, and again, I'm just picking one particular expectation for you is in the interest of time. So trends and challenges in the family and in parent-child relationships. And students are basically to analyze the impact of violence and abuse on family relationships with reference to victims and witnesses of child abuse and neglect, but also, as you can see here, there's elder abuse and neglect. And because we're trying to integrate well-being lens into our classes, we're really handling those issues from a strengths perspective. So we want the students to move beyond that very narrow lens of the individual to kind of how can you make a difference in the lives of the elderly, particularly, for instance, in the area of elder abuse, by moving beyond that individual and beyond perhaps the family, more perhaps to involve the community. And what is the duty of the community to make sure the elderly are protected, are safe, whether they're safe in their homes or with accommodations, or whether they're safe in nursing homes. And we know that the elderly were really hit very hard during the pandemic. So how can we make sure that we as students can make a difference in terms of the lives of the elderly? And us as educators, we have really a role and a duty to incorporate that well-being lens into our classes. And this is a particular course. Again, feel free to check the ministry document. And I do have a site for you at the end where you can check some of the free resources. So again, this is a really important area, and please feel free to borrow some of those ideas in your classrooms. Another course that I picked for you is called Challenge and Change in Society. This is a grade 12 university preparation course. One of the expectations that they have, the learning expectations, is it's a general one. It's called Global Inequalities. And students are able to demonstrate an understanding of the various types of discrimination. And a good example would be ageism, or sexism, or racism. And often we know that there are multiple lenses that the elderly are facing. So it's not just being older. So it could be racism, homophobia, ageism, and sexism, all as an interlocking lenses of oppression. So a teacher prompt would be, how can being labeled affect the future opportunities of a person or a group? What are some examples of ageism shown on an individual level, like for instance, jokes, or maybe perhaps on a systemic level, government policies that could limit seniors' access to resources? So these are some of the things that we want to bring to our classrooms, kind of a well-being lens, but also that goes beyond the individual level. Another course that I picked for you is called Human Development Throughout the Lifespan. And again, this is from our Ontario curriculum. The reference is there. You can check the document. There's a website that also has a lot of resources for this particular course that I'm recommending for you. And this particular course focuses on the physical, cognitive, and social emotional development from the prenatal period through old age. And students in this course will develop the research and inquiry skills by investigating issues related to human development. And one of the stages is definitely older age, the elderly. So a particular teacher prompt could be, after a stroke, how does the plasticity of the brain allow recovery of some functioning that had initially been lost? So students will be dealing with all the different areas that would affect the well-being of the elderly, not just the physical areas, but also cognitively. How could we make sure that the elderly stay healthy and their cognitive abilities? Physically, how can we have the proper supports for them? And social and emotional, we don't want the elderly to be excluded, and social exclusion, as we know from the social determinants of health, they do determine well-being, and particularly for this vulnerable group. The last two slides that I'm sharing with you are some resources. As you've seen from my webinar, I've discussed the City Studio London partnership. If you go to this website, City Studio London has a plethora of projects. If you're looking for ideas to basically apply in your post-secondary classes, City Studio is mostly a partnership between post-secondary institutions in the case of London. And they have examples of projects. You can see environmental scans. You can look at projects that could be geared towards the elderly, health promotion, well-being, community inclusion, tackling racism, all of those possibilities. So I highly encourage you to go and check the City Studio London website. I picked also for you an optimal aging portal from McMaster University. Feel free, they have a lot of very good resources. Again, if you're thinking you're teaching aging, perhaps an aging course, or maybe you're incorporating some kind of an aging, like for instance, in my case, I have in the courses that I teach, some of the expectations in my courses work around the elderly. Also, all the high school courses that we just saw together, these are all listed in the Ontario Revised Social Sciences and Humanities Curriculum, grades 9 to 12. I put the link for you here. I highly recommend you check it out. You'll get teacher prompts, you'll get course expectations, and then beyond that, how do you move from the course expectations to get some project ideas? I'm including for you here IFHE, which is the Ontario Family Studies and Home Economics Educators Association. IFHE is the voice for educators, family studies educators, home economics educators in Ontario. And I put the link for you for the IFHE website. IFHE has a plethora of resources on their website. If you're an educator and interested in getting some ideas in teaching well-being, maybe perhaps well-being around the elderly, but also well-being in general or different populations, and all the courses listed in the ministry, the family studies courses, there are some lesson plans there. There are some units of instruction there. Of course, IFHE has a membership. You can start with the free resources. And if you really like what you're getting, I highly encourage you to do a membership with IFHE. The membership is actually not expensive, and there's a lot of benefits to the membership. They do webinars, they do workshops throughout the year, so highly encouraged. Another very important source of information for home economics and family studies is OHEA, and this is the Ontario Home Economics Association. Again, I highly encourage you to check their website. You can be a member with OHEA. They have a plethora of resources on their website that could be for the elderly well-being, but also to any home economics or family studies topic that you can think of. They do also bring, they have webinars, they have speakers on their website. So I highly encourage you to check these. Another two courses here that I've picked from my colleagues at Brescia, and this is Drs. Descartes and Baumeister. Both of them teach courses on aging, the elderly. So Dr. Descartes teaches on midlife and elders years. She's in family studies and human development. She's in the same department where I am. And I put a link for her course, Midlife and Elder Years. Of course, online you would find her course outline with possibilities of topics that you could be teaching. So these could be a good starting point for you to, even if you're thinking of offering a new course around midlife and elder years. So you can check, and that's publicly available, Dr. Descartes' outline. There's also Nutrition, Aging, and Health. This is a course particularly, again, around aging, but in the food and nutrition department. And you can check that if you're interested in the area of food and nutrition. For the elderly, there's a course outline. You can get some ideas as in how you could possibly plan your course. So there's lots of resources there. I also picked for you here a YouTube clip, and I'll tell you a little bit about this. This is a book that I'm actually currently reading. It's called Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. So I don't know if that's true. I'm actually interested in knowing. We don't have to age. And can we live to 120? I don't know. And how can we keep our brains healthy? So that's really interesting. So I put the YouTube clip for you, and please do check it out. I do have actually on the next slide the book itself, and I got the book, so I got it actually as a present, from a friend of mine, and it's called Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. And the author is David Sinclair. He's a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School. He discusses in his new book, and as you can see, it's a fairly recent book, Lifespan, which distills really his cutting-edge research findings on the biological processes underpinning aging. And Sinclair describes lifestyle hacks. So it ties in really nicely with my webinar where I'm saying we need to move beyond the lifestyle. So when we're thinking well-being for the elderly, and because this is such an important group, and because this is for a whole decade, we're going to be looking and examining and trying to focus our energies around people in their later years, it's so important to get rid of those myths around lifestyle. So those lifestyle hacks, we need to get rid of them, and we need to get control and control to combat aging. And maybe perhaps there's some future scientific breakthroughs that promise to slow it down and maybe even reverse that aging process. I'll leave you with that thought. I'm not sure, but it's a great actually read, and it's a great book. I would like to thank you for being a great audience. I will share my email address with the IFHE office. I know I'm on the mailing list because I'm a member of IFHE. So if you have any questions about any of the projects that I discussed, I'm happy to share my resources. And I'm happy to get emails from members. So feel free to check our membership list. And I would leave you with that on this very positive note. Happy World Home Economics Day 2021. Keep well, take care, everyone, and bye for now.